autumn wind bit through Eleanor Hartwell's threadbare coat as she stood outside the Mercantile in Redemption Creek, Montana Territory, 1878. Her trembling fingers clutched the last remnant of her former life, a delicate gold locket containing her mother's portrait. Inside the shop, the merchant had just refused her credit for the third time that week. Her stomach had been empty for 2 days, and the schoolhouse where she'd been teaching had burned down a month ago, taking her small salary with it. "I'll trade this for a loaf of bread," she whispered to herself, rehearsing the words she'd have to say. Just enough to make it through one more week. The locket felt heavy in her palm, heavier than its weight in gold. It was all she had left of the life before her parents died of cholera on the wagon train west, before the town council decided they couldn't afford a teacher anymore, before hunger became her constant companion. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful if you could take just a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. Your support truly means everything and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. Thank you so much. She pushed open the Mercantile door, the bell jingling mockingly cheerful. Mr. Cassidy looked up from his ledger, his expression already hardening. Before she could speak, a deep voice cut through the dusty air. "Put that away." Eleanor turned. A man stood near the back of the store, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that seemed to fill the cramped space. He was perhaps 32, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working the land, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the prairie. A scar traced from his temple to his jaw, white against his tanned face. His clothing was simple, worn denim, a faded blue shirt, weathered boots, but clean. Everything about him suggested strength tempered by something else. Weariness, perhaps, or loss. "I beg your pardon?" Eleanor managed, tucking the locket protectively against her chest. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, like a man who'd learned to telegraph his intentions to avoid spooking nervous animals. "Gold isn't what we need here. You are." The words hung in the air between them, strange and unexpected. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "Sir, I don't—" "Jonas Thorne." He tipped his hat slightly, revealing dark hair threaded with premature silver. "I run the Three Rivers Ranch, 15 miles north. My cook quit last week, said the isolation was driving her mad. I've got 20 ranch hands who can barely boil water without burning it. I need someone who can prepare 3 meals a day, manage a household. Maybe teach my nephew his letters in the evenings." His gaze moved at her hands, noting the ink stains on her fingers, the calluses that came from holding chalk. "You're the school teacher." "I was." The word tasted bitter. "The school burned." "I know. Whole town knows." Jonas turned to Cassidy. "Put whatever Miss Hartwell needs on my account. Enough for a week's worth of supplies." Back to Eleanor. "Room and board included. $40 a month. You'd have your own quarters in the main house, separate entrance. Sundays off." It was more money than she'd made teaching. It was salvation wrapped in a stranger's gruff offer. But Eleanor had learned, in her 24 years, that salvation often came with a price. Women paid in ways that had nothing to do with money. "Mr. Thorne, I appreciate your offer, but I don't know you. For all I know, you could be walking into danger." He finished her thought, no offense in his tone. "That's smart thinking. Ask Cassidy here about me. Ask anyone in town. Take your time, but while you're deciding, let me buy you a meal at the boarding house. You look like you haven't eaten in days, and I can't in good conscience leave you standing here trying to trade your mother's memory for bread." Eleanor's hand flew to the locket. "How did you—" "Saw you looking at it through the window. Same way my sister used to look at the ring our mother left her, right before she died." Something shifted in his expression, a door opening briefly onto private grief before closing again. Some things aren't meant to be traded away, no matter how hungry we get. That was how Eleanor Hartwell found herself sitting across from Jonas Thorne in the boarding house dining room an hour later, watching him methodically work through a plate of beef stew while he told her, in his economical way, about the ranch. 3,000 acres, 100 head of cattle, 40 horses. My brother built it up from nothing, starting in '65 after the war. Jonas's voice dropped slightly. He and my sister-in-law died of pneumonia 2 winters ago. Left behind their son, my nephew Daniel. He's 8 now. Smart boy, but he's been struggling. Hasn't spoken much since they passed. "And the ranch hands?" Eleanor asked, trying to ignore how good the bread tasted, how her body seemed to sigh with relief as warmth and nourishment spread through her. "Good men, mostly. Some are drifters, but they work hard. I won't lie to you, Miss Hartwell. It's rough living. We're isolated. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles south. Winter up there can be brutal. The last cook couldn't handle the loneliness, and she was a widow woman who'd raised 6 children on a homestead. But you handle it." His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that recognized something in her. A fellow survivor, perhaps. Someone who'd learned to endure. "I don't have a choice. Daniel needs stability. The men depend on the ranch for their livelihoods, and I made a promise to my brother that I'd keep his dream alive." "Promises can be heavy chains," Eleanor said quietly. "Or anchors. Depends on whether you're drowning or just trying to stay put in a strong current." Eleanor considered this. Outside the window, Redemption Creek went about its business. Wagons rolling past, miners heading toward the saloon, respectable women crossing the street to avoid passing too close to the dance hall. She'd been in this town for 3 years, and not one person had offered to help when she'd lost everything. But this stranger, this silent rancher with sad eyes and careful movements, had seen her desperation and offered dignity instead of charity. "I'll need to see the living quarters before I agree," she said. "And I want your word, Mr. Thorne, that you'll respect the boundaries of my employment. I'll work hard for you, but I won't be—" "You won't be bothered. You have my word, and I'll put it in writing if you want. Any man on my ranch who disrespects you will be off the property by sundown. That includes me." He pushed his empty plate aside. "I've got a wagon outside. We can ride up today if you're willing. You can look around, meet Daniel, and if it doesn't feel right, I'll bring you back tomorrow morning with enough supplies to keep you going while you figure out your next step." It was more fairness than Eleanor had encountered in a long time. She thought about the cold room she'd been renting above the dress shop, the landlady's increasingly pointed comments about past due rent. She thought about the locket in her pocket and how close she'd come to trading away the last piece of her mother's love. "All right, Mr. Thorne, I'll come see your ranch." The ride north was quiet, broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves and the creak of the wagon. The landscape opened up around them, endless prairie grass turning gold in the autumn light, the jagged line of mountains purple in the distance, the wide Montana sky unmarred by clouds. Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen slightly, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "It's beautiful," she said, surprising herself. Jonas glanced at her, and for the first time, she saw the ghost of a smile. Wait until you see it at sunset. My brother used to say, God painted these mountains every evening just to remind us what beauty looks like. They arrived at Three Rivers Ranch as the afternoon light began to slant golden across the valley. The main house was larger than Eleanor had expected, a two-story structure of timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings dotted the property, a massive barn, a bunkhouse for the hands, a smokehouse, corrals where horses watched their approach with interested eyes. Jonas helped her down from the wagon, his hands respectful on her waist, released the moment her feet touched ground. Your quarters are through here. He led her around to the side of the house, where a separate entrance opened into a small but well-appointed suite, a bedroom with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt, a sitting area with a chair near the window, even a small writing desk. It was more privacy and comfort than she'd had in years. The main kitchen is through that door. Jonas indicated an internal door, currently closed. You'd have your own access, but you can lock it from your side if you want. Meals are at 6, noon and 6. I'll introduce you to Daniel now, if you're ready. Eleanor nodded, smoothing her worn dress self-consciously. Jonas led her through the house, which was clean but clearly lacking a woman's touch, functional, sparse, with only a few personal items visible. Photographs on the mantel showed a younger Jonas with a man who must have been his brother, both smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. Another photo showed a pretty woman holding a baby. They found Daniel in what appeared to be a study, surrounded by books, but not reading them. He looked up when they entered, his eyes, so like Jonas's, wary and old in his young face. Daniel, this is Miss Hartwell. She's going to be staying with us for a while, helping with meals, and maybe teaching you some lessons. Miss Hartwell, this is my nephew, Daniel Thorne. Hello, Daniel. Eleanor knelt so she was at his eye level, something she'd always done with her students. Your uncle tells me you like books. What are you reading right now? The boy looked at Jonas, who nodded encouragingly. Nothing, Daniel whispered, his voice rusty from disuse. I can't remember how the stories go anymore. Eleanor's heart clenched. She knew that feeling. Grief so heavy, it pushed everything else out. Even joy, even imagination. Would you like me to read to you sometime? I know some wonderful stories. And maybe, if you wanted, you could help me in the kitchen. I've always found that getting my hands busy helps my heart settle. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, and Eleanor saw Jonas shift behind her, heard the change in his breathing. When she glanced back, his expression had transformed, the careful neutrality replaced by something raw and hopeful. Would you like that, Daniel? Jonas asked, his voice rougher than before. The boy nodded, just barely. Then it's settled, Eleanor said, rising. I'll start tomorrow morning with breakfast. I hope you both like flapjacks. That evening, Jonas drove her back to town to collect her few belongings. As they loaded her trunk, so light, containing so little, into the wagon, he spoke quietly. Thank you for what you said to Daniel. He hasn't offered to help with anything in months. Hasn't shown interest in much of anything. Grief is like that, Eleanor said. It makes everything else seem impossibly far away. The trick is finding small things to care about, small purposes, until the big ones don't seem so impossible anymore. Jonas studied her in the gathering dusk. You sound like someone who knows. I am. She met his gaze steadily. We're all carrying something, Mr. Thorne. The question is whether we carry it alone or whether we let someone help shoulder the load. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that didn't need words. Two survivors, recognizing each other in the wilderness. Two wounded people, considering the possibility that healing might be easier in company. "Jonas," he said, "you should call me Jonas, and I'll call you Eleanor, if that's all right. Seems like we'll be seeing a lot of each other, and Mr. Thorne feels too formal for passing the salt." Eleanor smiled, a real smile, the first in weeks. "All right, Jonas, let's see if I can keep your ranch hands from starving." The first week at Three Rivers Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor discovered she had a talent for large-scale cooking, and the men's grateful enthusiasm for anything that wasn't burned or bland bolstered her confidence. She established routines: breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, brought out to wherever the men were working, supper at dusk in the main house. Daniel began appearing in the kitchen each morning, silent at first, just watching. Then one day he started handing her things: a spoon, a bowl, the flour tin, anticipating what she needed. By the end of the second week, he was helping her knead bread, his small hands working the dough while she told him stories from the books she'd loved as a child. Jonas remained respectful, almost distant during those first weeks. He took his meals with the men in the bunkhouse more often than not, giving Eleanor space to establish herself. But she caught him watching sometimes, through the kitchen window or from across the yard, his expression unreadable. It was during the third week that everything shifted. An autumn storm rolled in from the mountains without warning, turning the afternoon black as night. Eleanor was in the kitchen, preparing supper, when she heard the shout from outside. Urgent, frightened, she ran to the window and saw men running toward the barn, someone being carried between them. Her heart seized. She knew, somehow, before she even saw his face. Jonas. Eleanor flew out the door, skirts hiked up, running through the rain. By the time she reached the barn, they'd laid him on a pile of hay bales. His shirt was soaked with blood, his face pale, one of the men pressing a wadded cloth to his side. "What happened?" she demanded, dropping to her knees beside him. "Fence broke during the storm," one of the hands, a grizzled man named Pete, explained. "Boss was trying to calm the horses, and one kicked out. Caught him in the ribs. Might have broken something. Definitely tore him up." Jonas's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Eleanor's hands, steady despite her racing heart, moved to examine the wound. "We need to get him inside. Carefully. And someone fetch my medical kit from my room." She'd learned basic field medicine from her father, who'd been a doctor before the cholera took him. She'd never thought she'd need those skills again, but now she was grateful for every lesson, every instruction on how to clean a wound, how to stitch torn flesh, how to watch for signs of infection. They carried Jonas to his room, and Eleanor sent everyone away except Pete, who helped her cut away the bloody shirt. The wound was bad, a long gash along his ribs where the horse's hoof had caught him, already purpling with bruising underneath. But the ribs didn't seem broken, and the wound, while deep, had missed anything vital. "This is going to hurt," she told Jonas, who'd regained consciousness but remained silent, his jaw clenched. "I need to clean it thoroughly, and then I'll have to stitch it. I have some whiskey." "No." His voice was rough. "I need my head clear. Daniel is with one of the men who's good with children. He's safe, Jonas. You need to let me take care of you now." His storm-gray eyes locked on hers. "Go slow," he whispered. "It hurts." "I'll die before I hurt you more than necessary," Eleanor promised, and set to work. For the next hour, she cleaned and stitched while Jonas gritted his teeth against the pain, his hands fisting in the sheets. Pete held him steady when needed, but mostly it was Eleanor's soft voice, talking him through each step, telling him stories, keeping him focused on her words rather than the needle that kept Jonas anchored. When she finally tied off the last stitch, her hands were shaking. Jonas's face was gray with pain and exhaustion, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cold. "Rest now," she murmured, pulling a quilt over him. "I'll check on you in a few hours. Pete, stay with him. If he develops a fever or the bleeding starts again, come get me immediately." But as she turned to leave, Jonas's hand caught her wrist, his grip weak but insistent. "Eleanor, thank you." The way he said her name, rough with pain and something else, something vulnerable, made her throat tight. "You said you needed a cook. You didn't say I'd have to practice medicine too. That's going to cost you extra." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before exhaustion pulled him under. For 3 days, Eleanor barely left Jonas's side. She tended his wound, changed his bandages, monitored for infection. She read to him when he was awake, kept cool cloths on his forehead when fever threatened. Daniel crept into the room on the second day, his eyes wide and frightened. "Is Uncle Jonas going to die like Mama and Papa?" he whispered. Eleanor pulled the boy into her lap, holding him close. "No, sweetheart. He's strong, and he's fighting hard. But he needs us to be brave for him now. Can you do that?" Daniel nodded against her shoulder, and from the bed, Jonas's eyes opened, full of an emotion so intense it made Eleanor's breath catch. On the 4th day, Jonas insisted on getting up, despite Eleanor's protests. "I'm going mad lying here," he growled, swinging his legs carefully over the side of the bed. "I need to check on the stock, see what damage the storm did." "You need to rest," Eleanor said firmly, hands on her hips. "The men are perfectly capable of managing without you for a few more days." "Miss Hartwell, Eleanor, and I mean it, Jonas Thorne. You tear those stitches, you'll set your healing back weeks. Is that what you want? To be laid up all winter?" They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Jonas settled back against the pillows with a frustrated sigh. "You're a stubborn woman. I learned from necessity, just like you." She softened slightly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I know you're used to carrying everything alone. But you don't have to right now. Let someone else shoulder the load for a while." His hand found hers on the quilt, his calloused fingers gentle against her wrist. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd just cook and keep house. Someone who'd stay at arm's length." His thumb traced circles on her pulse point, perhaps unconsciously. "Not someone who'd run through a storm to help. Not someone who'd sit with me for 3 days, who'd know exactly what to say to Daniel." He trailed off, his eye. He needed a cook, but the poor teacher served him lessons of the heart instead, she said softly, trying to lighten the moment, even as something trembled between them, fragile and new and terrifying. "What lesson is that?" Jonas asked, his voice low. "That some things can't be done alone, that accepting help isn't weakness, that," she swallowed hard, "that maybe we were both surviving when we could be living." The moments stretched between them, laden with possibility. Then Daniel's voice called from downstairs, breaking the spell. Eleanor pulled her hand away gently, standing. "I should check on dinner. Pete said some of the men were asking about—" "Eleanor," Jonas's voice stopped her at the door. "When I'm healed, I'd like to teach you to ride. Really ride, not just sit in a wagon. Would you like that?" She looked back at him, saw the vulnerability in offering this small thing. this glimpse of a future that extended beyond employer and employee. I'd like that very much. The next weeks passed in a careful dance. Jonas healed, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. True to his word, he began teaching Eleanor to ride once the doctor from town pronounced him fit. They started in the corral. Jonas patient and encouraging, as Eleanor learned to communicate with the gentle mare he'd chosen for her. Press with your left leg. Ease up with your right, he instructed, walking alongside. Talk to her. Let her know you're partners, not master and servant. Horses respect that. As autumn deepened toward winter, their rides grew longer. Jonas showed Eleanor the full extent of the ranch, the high meadows where they'd move the cattle in summer, the caves where they'd sheltered during bad storms, the creek that gave the ranch its name, running cold and clear, even as ice formed along its banks. During one ride, as they paused to water the horses, Jonas told her about his brother. James was 5 years older than me, took care of me after our parents died, made sure I got an education, even though we were barely scraping by. When the war came, he enlisted, sent most of his pay home to keep me in school. His voice roughened. He survived 4 years of fighting, came home, built this place with his bare hands, found love, started a family. And then a fever took him in 3 days. It doesn't make sense. Death rarely does, Eleanor said quietly. My parents survived the cholera outbreak in St. Louis, packed up everything to start over out west, made it almost to Oregon territory, and then a contaminated water source killed them a week before we would have reached the destination. I spent 3 years being angry at God for the unfairness of it. And now I think maybe the point isn't to understand why people are taken, but to honor them by living fully with the time we're given. Jonas studied her across the small distance between their horses. You're wise beyond your years. I'm just a woman who's lost enough to know what's worth holding on to. That evening, Jonas asked her to stay after supper. Daniel had gone to bed, and the house was quiet, the fire crackling in the hearth. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, a careful space between them. I've been thinking, Jonas began, turning his coffee cup in his hands. About the spring. There's a lot of work to be done, and if we have a good year, I want to expand the herd. But that means I'll need help, not just with cooking, but with managing the household books, maybe even dealing with the cattle buyers when they come through. I can do that, Eleanor said, watching him. I managed the school's budget before the fire. I know you can. That's not... He set the cup down, finally meeting her eyes. What I'm asking is whether you want to, whether you see yourself staying past winter, past next year, whether this feels like something more than just a job to you. Eleanor's pulse quickened. What does it feel like to you, Jonas? Like home, he said simply. For the first time since James died. Daniel smiles again. The house feels alive, and when I ride up at the end of the day and see smoke from the chimney, see lamplight in the windows, I feel... He paused, struggling with words. I feel like I'm coming home to something, instead of just returning to a place. Is that why you wanted to talk to me? To tell me you appreciate my work? No. He slid closer, the space between them narrowing. I wanted to talk to you because somewhere between you stitching me up and teaching Daniel to laugh again, between watching you tame that mare and listening to you read poetry by the fire, I stopped seeing you as my cook and started seeing you as... He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, asking permission. Eleanor leaned into his touch, feeling the calloused warmth of his palm against her cheek. As what? As the woman I'm falling in love with, Jonas whispered. And I need to know if I'm alone in this feeling, or if you. She kissed him, cutting off his words. It was soft, tentative, both of them trembling slightly. Jonas made a low sound in his throat, his hand sliding into her hair as he deepened the kiss, his other arm wrapping carefully around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against hers. I need you to know something, Eleanor. What I feel for you, it's not gratitude or convenience or loneliness. It's you, your strength, your kindness, the way you see people's hearts instead of just their surfaces, the way you've helped Daniel heal, the way you make me want to be better than I am. You're already good, Eleanor said, her hands resting on his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and fast under her palm. You're the best man I've ever known, Jonas Thorne. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You offered me dignity when I had nothing. You trusted me with the things you loved most, your home, your nephew, your brother's legacy. And my heart, Jonas added. I'm trusting you with that too. Then I should tell you that you've had mine for weeks, Eleanor admitted. I tried not to let it happen. I told myself this was just employment, that I couldn't afford to hope for more. But then you'd do something like bring Daniel flowers to give to me, or leave books you thought I'd enjoy on my desk, or look at me across the dinner table like I was something precious, and I'd fall a little more. Jonas kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. Marry me, he said against her lips. I know it's fast, and you might want time, but I'm tired of pretending I don't want forever with you. Marry me, Eleanor. Be Daniel's mother in truth. Be my wife. Build this life with me. Eleanor pulled back just far enough to see his face, to read the hope and fear and love in his eyes. Yes, she said, laughing as tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, Jonas, I'll marry you. But their happiness was short-lived. 2 days after their engagement, as Eleanor worked in the kitchen, while Jonas rode out with the men to move some cattle, a stranger appeared at the ranch. He was well-dressed, with cold eyes and an entitled air that immediately set Eleanor's nerves on edge. I'm looking for Eleanor Hartwell, he said, when she answered his knock. I'm Miss Hartwell. How can I help you? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Theodore Grimsby. I'm an attorney representing your uncle, Silas Hartwell of Ohio. I'm afraid I have some rather urgent business to discuss with you. Eleanor's blood ran cold. I have no Uncle Silas. My father was an only child. Your father's cousin, then. The legal relationship is complicated, but the relevant fact is this. Your father owed Mr. Hartwell a substantial sum of money before his death. That debt has now passed to you, along with the interest accumulated over 5 years. The total comes to $1,500. That's impossible. I don't have $1,500. Which is why Mr. Hartwell is prepared to offer you an alternative. Grimsby pulled papers from his satchel. He'll forgive the entire debt if you return to Ohio and enter into a marriage contract with his business associate, a Mr. Horace Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton is a widower of means who needs a wife to manage his household and care for his 3 children. Absolutely not. Eleanor's voice shook with fury. I don't know this Mr. Hartwell or his associate, and I certainly don't owe anyone $1,500. My father would never. Your father signed a promissory note in 1873, which I have here. He held out a yellowed document. His signature is witnessed and notarized. The debt is legal and binding. Eleanor stared at the paper, recognizing her father's handwriting, her heart sinking. It was dated just before they joined the wagon train. He must have borrowed the money to outfit them for the journey. "And if I refuse both options?" she asked. "Then Mr. Hartwell will pursue collection through the courts. They'll seize any assets you have, garnish any wages you earn. You'll spend the rest of your life working to pay off this debt, never getting ahead." Grimsby's smile was cruel. "Or you can accept Mr. Pemberton's offer. I understand you've been working as a domestic here. Surely being a wife to a wealthy man is preferable to being a servant." "Get off this property," Eleanor said, her voice low and dangerous. "Now." "You have 1 week to decide," Grimsby said, tipping his hat mockingly. "I'm staying at the hotel in Redemption Creek. After that, I return to Ohio with you or with legal papers to begin seizing your assets. Choose wisely, Miss Hartwell." When Jonas returned that evening, he found Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. The dinner she'd been preparing forgotten on the stove. Daniel hovered nearby, clearly distressed. "Eleanor?" Jonas crossed to her quickly, kneeling beside her chair. "What happened?" She told him everything, her voice flat with shock. When she finished, Jonas's jaw was tight with anger. "This is extortion," he said. "He can't force you." "He can," Eleanor interrupted. "The debt is real, Jonas. I saw my father's signature, and I have nothing." "Then I'll pay it," Jonas said immediately. "No." Eleanor's voice was firm. "I won't let you do that. $1,500 is a fortune. It's more than this ranch probably makes in a year. I won't let you risk Daniel's future, your brother's legacy, for my problems." "Our problems," Jonas corrected. "We're engaged, Eleanor. What affects you affects me, which is exactly why I have to end the engagement." Eleanor forced herself to say the words, each one cutting like glass. "I won't chain you to my debts, Jonas. You deserve better. Daniel deserves better." Jonas's hands gripped hers almost painfully. "Don't do this. We'll find another way." "There is no other way." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "In a week, I'll either leave with Grimsby or spend the rest of my life working to pay off a debt I can never satisfy. Either way, I can't marry you. I can't bring this burden into your life." "You're not a burden," Jonas said fiercely. "You're the woman I love. We'll fight this together." But Eleanor shook her head, pulling her hands free. "I'm so sorry, Jonas. I never should have let myself hope for more than I could have. I never should have said yes." She fled to her room then, locking the door behind her, and wept like her heart was breaking, because it was. The next 3 days were agony. Eleanor moved through her duties mechanically, avoiding Jonas as much as possible. Daniel withdrew again, sensing the adult's distress. The whole ranch seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the week to pass. On the 4th day, Jonas was gone before sunrise. He didn't return until after dark, and when he did, his face was grim but determined. He found Eleanor in the kitchen and closed the door behind him. "I went to see a lawyer in the territorial capital," he said, without preamble. "He reviewed the promissory note you described. Eleanor, that debt isn't enforceable in Montana territory." She looked up sharply. "What?" "Your father signed it in Ohio. The creditor is in Ohio, but you're a resident of Montana territory now and have been for years. Montana law protects residents from collection on out-of-territory debts over 5 years old, unless the creditor can prove you incurred new debts to them while living here. This Grimsby is bluffing." Hope, dangerous and fragile, bloomed in Eleanor's chest. "Are you sure?" I'm sure. But there's more. Jonas pulled a folded telegram from his pocket. I sent inquiries to Ohio. This Horace Pemberton doesn't exist. Neither does your supposed uncle Silas Hartwell. The whole thing is a con, Eleanor. Someone researched your background, forged that promissory note, and sent Grimsby to trick you into effectively selling yourself into servitude. Probably would have taken you back east and forced you into one of those contract marriage schemes where women essentially become property. Eleanor sank into a chair, shaking. But the signature, probably real. They likely stole it from genuine documents that were discarded or poorly archived. But the debt itself is fake. Jonas knelt beside her again. You're free, Eleanor. He has no power over you. Are you certain? She gripped his hands like a lifeline. If there's any chance he could, I'm certain. And tomorrow, when he comes for your answer, we're gonna make sure he understands that if he or anyone working with him ever approaches you again, I'll have him arrested for attempted fraud and kidnapping. Eleanor threw her arms around Jonas's neck, sobbing with relief. He held her close, one hand cradling her head against his shoulder. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered. I thought I'd have to choose between being yours and destroying you. Why did you try to push me away instead of letting me help? She pulled back to look at him. Because I've been alone for so long that I forgot how to lean on anyone. Because the people I loved were taken from me, and I learned to protect myself by not needing anyone. Because I was terrified that if I let myself depend on you, I'd lose you too, and I wouldn't survive it. Jonas cupped her face in his hands. You're not property, Eleanor. You're a person, a brilliant, strong, beautiful person who doesn't have to carry everything alone anymore. I see a woman worth saving. No, that's wrong. I see a woman who saved herself, but who's willing to let someone walk beside her anyway. That's what you are to me. That's what we can be together. Together, Eleanor whispered, the word a promise. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Eleanor kissed him back with all the love and relief and hope she'd been holding back. When Grimsby appeared the next day, he found Jonas waiting on the porch, the ranch hands arranged behind him like an army. Eleanor stood at Jonas's side, her chin high, her hand in his. Miss Hartwell has made her decision, Jonas said coldly. She's staying here as my fiancée. Your services are no longer required. Grimsby's eyes narrowed. The debt is unenforceable in Montana territory, as you well know. The whole scheme is fraud, which makes you liable for criminal charges. You have 1 hour to leave Redemption Creek. If you're still in town after that, I'll have the sheriff arrest you. And if you or anyone connected to this con ever approaches Miss Hartwell again, I'll make it my personal mission to see you all in prison. Do we understand each other? Grimsby looked between them, calculating. Whatever he saw in Jonas's face and in the faces of the armed men behind him made him decide that retreat was wiser than confrontation. He tipped his hat with mocking courtesy and rode away. Eleanor sagged against Jonas as the tension drained out of her. It's really over? It's really over. You're safe. That evening, they gathered in the main house. Eleanor, Jonas, Daniel, and Pete, who'd become something of a fixture in their lives. Jonas raised his glass of cider. To Eleanor, he said, who came here looking for work and gave us back our family. To family, Pete agreed, smiling. Daniel stood up on his chair, his young voice clear and strong. And to Uncle Jonas, who said Miss Eleanor would stay forever. When's the wedding? Everyone laughed, the tension of the past week dissolving in the warmth of shared relief. Jonas pulled Eleanor close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Soon, he promised. Very soon. They were married 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning, with snow falling softly outside. The ceremony was simple, held in the main house with Pete and the ranch hands as witnesses, Daniel serving as ring-bearer with solemn pride. The circuit preacher read the vows, and when Jonas slicked a simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger, his mother's ring, which he'd been saving for the right woman, she felt pieces of herself that had been broken for years finally begin to mend. "I love you," Jonas said, for all to hear. "I've loved you since you stitched me up and told me stories to distract me from the pain. I've loved you since I watched you coax Daniel back into the world. I've loved you since the moment I saw you trying to trade something precious for survival and decided you were worth more than all the gold in Montana. You're my home, Eleanor Thorne, and I promise to honor that every day we have together." Eleanor smiled through tears. "I love you too. You saw me when I was invisible. You offered me a place when I had nowhere to go. You taught me that strength doesn't mean carrying everything alone, that accepting help isn't weakness, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust someone with our hearts. Thank you for being patient with mine." When they kissed, sealing their vows, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers. Daniel hugged Eleanor's waist, and she knelt to embrace him properly. "Can I really call you Mama now?" he whispered. "I'd be honored," Eleanor whispered back, her heart so full it ached. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. A feast Eleanor had prepared with Daniel's help, music from one of the hands who played fiddle, dancing in the cleared main room. As the evening wound down and guests began departing for the bunkhouse, Jonas swept Eleanor into one more dance, just the two of them, moving slowly in the firelit room. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," Eleanor admitted. 6 months ago, I was standing outside a mercantile, ready to trade away my mother's locket for a loaf of bread. I thought my life was over. And now? "Now you're home," Jonas finished. "We both are." A move to the bedroom they would now share. And what passed between them there was tender and patient. Jonas careful with Eleanor's inexperience. Eleanor brave in her trust. They learned each other slowly, with laughter and whispered words and touches that spoke of commitment, deeper than passion. Afterward, Eleanor lay with her head on Jonas's chest, listening to his heartbeat, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "Tell me something," she said. "That first day, in the mercantile, did you really need a cook, or were you just looking for an excuse to help me?" Jonas was quiet for a long moment. "I did need a cook," he said finally, "but I didn't need a cook. But I could have posted a notice. The truth is, I saw you through that window. Saw the way you looked at that locket, and I recognized someone at the end of her rope. I'd been there myself after James died. If Pete hadn't forcibly stopped me from putting a bullet in my head, I wouldn't be here. So when I saw you, I thought, maybe I could be for you what Pete was for me. A reason to hold on one more day." Eleanor lifted her head to look at him. "You never told me that." "I'm telling you now. You saved my life too, Eleanor. You reminded me what I was living for. Not just responsibility or duty, but joy, connection, love." She kissed him, slow and sweet. "Then I guess we saved each other." "Together," Jonas agreed, pulling her close again. Winter settled over Three Rivers Ranch in earnest. But inside the main house, there was warmth and laughter. Eleanor taught Daniel reading and arithmetic in the mornings, cooked for the household in the afternoons, and spent evenings with Jonas, planning for the spring, reading by the fire, or simply sitting in companionable silence. She continued to surprise the ranch hands with her willingness to learn. By February, she was helping with the horses, had learned to shoot well enough to hunt small game, and could read weather signs almost as well as Jonas. The men, initially skeptical of their boss marrying his cook, came to respect Eleanor as much as they did Jonas, recognizing that she was a partner in every sense of the word. One evening in late February, Jonas came in from the barn to find Eleanor and Daniel baking bread together, both dusted with flour, Daniel explaining the process with the earnest authority of a professor, while Eleanor listened with exaggerated attention. "And then you punch it down, that's the best part, and let it rise again," Daniel was saying. "But why does it need to rise twice?" Eleanor asked. "Uncle Jonas says bread is like people. You have to knock them down sometimes to make them stronger." Jonas cleared his throat, and both turned to him. "I may have said something like that," he admitted, "but the context was different." Eleanor laughed, and the sound filled the warm kitchen like music. Jonas crossed to them, pulling them both into an embrace, and thought about how far they'd all come. Daniel, speaking freely now, engaged with life again. Eleanor, her eyes bright with contentment, instead of desperate hunger. And himself, no longer just surviving, but living fully. "I have something to tell you both," Eleanor said that night, after Daniel had gone to bed. She took Jonas's hand, placing it on her still flat stomach. "I'm going to have a baby, due in September." Jonas stared at her, and for a moment she worried. They hadn't discussed children, hadn't planned this so soon. But then his face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise over the mountains. "A baby," he breathed. "Eleanor, we're going to have a baby." He kissed her deeply, then dropped to his knees, pressing his lips to her stomach through her dress. "Hello in there," he whispered. "I'm your papa, and I already love you more than I can say. And your mama is the strongest, bravest woman I know. You're going to love her." Eleanor's hands stroked through his hair, her heart overflowing. "And your papa is the most honorable man in Montana Territory," she told their unborn child. "He's going to teach you everything important. How to ride, how to work hard, how to treat people with dignity, and how to love without reservation." Jonas stood, pulling her against him. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saying yes that day, for staying, for taking a chance on us." "Thank you for seeing me," Eleanor replied, "for recognizing that what I needed wasn't gold or charity, but someone who believed I was worth more than my circumstances suggested." They stood together in the quiet house, holding each other, feeling the future take shape around them, full of possibility, rooted in love. Spring came to Three Rivers Ranch with a rush of green growth and new calves. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed healthily, though she refused to slow down until Jonas finally put his foot down in July, insisting she rest more. "The baby and I had a conversation," he told her, his hand spread protectively on her rounded belly. "We decided you need to take it easier." "Oh, you had a conversation, did you?" Eleanor arched an eyebrow. "Very serious conversation. The baby agrees with me on everything." "The baby is going to be as stubborn as both of us," Eleanor predicted. Heaven help us all. Their daughter was born on a warm September evening, with the territory doctor in attendance and Daniel pacing nervously downstairs with Pete. The labor was long, but ultimately uncomplicated. And when Jonas finally held his daughter, tiny, red-faced, perfect, he wept openly. "Rose," Eleanor said softly, watching them, "for your sister, and because even in the hardest places, beautiful things grow." "Rose Amelia Thorne," Jonas agreed. He brought the baby to Eleanor, placing her in her mother's arms, then gathered them both close. "My girls, my family." Daniel burst into the room moments later, Pete having finally given him permission, and stared at his new cousin with wide eyes. "She's so small," he whispered. "You were this small once," Eleanor told him. "Come meet your cousin Rose." Daniel approached carefully, reaching out one finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. Rose's fingers closed around his, and Daniel's face lit up with wonder. "She's holding on to me." "She knows your family," Jonas said. "She knows you're going to be the best cousin in the world." 5 years later, on a summer evening in 1884, Eleanor stood on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Jonas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Below them, the ranch bustled with life. Daniel, now 13 and already as tall as Jonas, was teaching Rose and her little brother James, named for the uncle he'd never meet, how to rope a fence post. Pete supervised from the corral fence, calling out encouragement. "Remember when you told me you just needed a cook?" Eleanor said, leaning back against her husband's chest. Jonas laughed, the sound rumbling through her. "Best hiring decision I ever made." "You paid $40 a month for someone to turn your life upside down." Bargain of the century. He turned her in his arms, his eyes warm with love. "Though I should clarify, you didn't turn my life upside down. You turned it right side up. Everything before you was just waiting. This," he gestured to the children, the ranch, the life they'd built, "this is living." Eleanor smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I love you, Jonas Thorne. Thank you for being stubborn enough to see past my circumstances to who I could be. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on a broken rancher and his grieving nephew," Jonas replied. "Thank you for teaching us that family isn't just blood, it's choice. It's showing up every day and choosing each other." "Together," Eleanor said, the word that had become their touchstone. "Together," Jonas agreed, and kissed her as the sun painted the Montana sky in gold and rose, blessing the home they'd built from desperation, faith, and love. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and Jonas's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.